Welcome to Queen Deluxe. Let's do some vintage sewing. In this video, I'm going to discuss bias draping. Bias draping is a technique perfected by Madeleine Vionnet in the 1930s. We'll do a short description of her work and so much more. This video is part of a series. If you haven't caught my first video on how to pad out a dress form, be sure to do that first. And then be sure to check out my next video after this one, and I will be bias draping an entire 1930s dress. This video is part of the CocoVid celebration. If you want to check out playlists and everything that's going on with that, be sure to check out the description box below. Also, at the end of this video, if you're here to collect a badge, it's at the end. If you want to know about the badge collecting game that is happening, there is a whole paragraph in the description box below. You can't talk about bias draping without talking about Madeleine Vionnet. This is Madeleine Vionnet, one of the influential women designers of the early 20th century. She was born in 1876, just outside of Paris. At 12, she started work as a lace maker's apprentice. At the end of the 1900s, she learned dressmaking. In 1901 to 1905, she worked with the Cailloux sisters in Paris, honing her skills, and then became a designer herself. She opened Maison Vionnet in 1912 and had to close it again in 1914 because of World War I. She reopened in 1919 and continued until 1939, closed because of World War II. She called herself a dressmaker. Others called her an architect among dressmakers. I call her a genius. She is often credited with inventing bias draping. While this is not true, she certainly perfected it. She was inspired by classical design. Not a fan of the corset, she preferred the woman's natural form. She used large amounts of geometric shapes in her designs. Her bias draped gowns are truly marvels of engineering. I will link a bunch of books and articles for you to peruse. This is just a brief overview of her contributions to fashion. Okay, now that you know about Madeleine Vionnet and her life and how she influenced bias draping in the 1930s fashions, I thought we would do a little primer on bias draping. So Vionnet loved to start out with geometric shapes. So we're gonna start with this dress, which is just 4 squares. So we also have to talk about grain. Okay, square fabric. We have the straighted grain, which is the selvage. That is the edge, the factory edge. And then we have the cross grain. That is the cut edge of the fabric. Then we have true bias, which is a 45-degree angle from the straight. Okay? True bias is where the warp and the weft threads come together and create the most movement. So we got straight grain, and it is like the strongest. It's gonna hold, it wants to be plumb. We got the cross grain that has a little bit of give. Then we got true bias, which has the most give. So Vionnet wanted her dresses to move and to flow and to curve over the natural form, so she decided to use the bias as the vehicle to see the shape of the natural body. Okay, so we're gonna go. That straighted grain always wants to hang plumb. Show you just a little bit of this. How it's gonna, you can see the form when you manipulate it. Alright, so we're gonna start with her 4 square dress. I'm just gonna do the front. I'm gonna put the straight on the neckline. Cross over under the arm. The reason I'm putting the straight on the neckline is that it will not stretch out. I don't know if you've ever worn a bias dress, but a lot of times the hem will become uneven over time. We don't want that happening at the neckline, and so we want to control that as much as possible. I'm going to put straight at the neckline. Now this fabric is a little stiffer than what you would probably want. It's what I have a lot of that was free, and bias draping can be expensive. Madeleine Vionnet, she used half-scale forms to figure out her designs and then moved to the full form, so she wasn't wasting fabric when she's playing around with draping. But I figured I can use the squares again, so it's fine. So in the original dress, it is stitched here on the bias all the way down. And then the same thing would happen on the sides. So you get a handkerchief kind of effect. It's very floaty and beautiful for the body. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So I have an example that I've made previously out of a slinkier fabric, so you get the effect. We'll go ahead and pop that on the form. Now you can see how really it hugs the form, not unlike the acetate lining, which kind of floated. So it really does depend on the type of fabric you're using, how it affects the drape. The heavier and like those, 4-ply crepes and crepe back satins, they're gonna work better for you, and that's what all of those Hollywood gowns are made out of. All right, so I cut off the corners at the front and left them at the side. Pretty, right? So there's a lot of examples of Vionnet working with squares in different sizes. You would start with like one over the hip, one center front. There's even this dress that is bananas. It is a silk velvet, and it is gradiating sizes of squares in that silk velvet, where she has inverted the nap. So the nap is this way, the nap is this way, so that you can see the piecework. So they all fit together, and so they start out smaller and grow until they get at the bottom, which they're the largest. It is a geometric marvel, and I am constantly surprised and amazed at things that happen or happened in that studio. It's crazy. All right, so the next shape we're going to work on is a quarter circle. Vionnet used the quarter circles quite a bit in her designs. I think it was a good starting place for her. So I'm going to have the straight grain on one side, cross grain on the other. I have cut this at 60 inches because that's how wide the fabric was. So it's like a 16-inch quarter circle. So often put the true bias down the center front, and then we work towards the back, putting those, that straight and that bias, that straight and that cross together. Now, as you know, I don't know if you, maybe you don't know, sewing the straight and the straight together and a straight and a cross together is a lot easier than sewing two biases together. She was, since she grew up in a workroom, I think she thought of her designs in, ease of sewing things together and what was going to work better. She had that. It wasn't like a super designer brain. I think she came from a construction background, so that influenced the way she designed. And all of it was like it's 3D, it's construction based, it's using shape in an interesting way. All right, so I'm gonna pin this quickly. Darts or start shaping seams here. Tempted to cut it. Let's see what happens. Another thing that happens with bias draping, traditional flat pattern, your left and your right are going to be the same. They're going to be mirror images of each other, yeah? Even if the design is the same from side to side, because we have something on straight of grain and something on cross grain, they're going to be doing different things. So your pattern might look different from side to side, but when it's on the dress form, it's going to look symmetrical, if that's what you have planned out. There's also a lot of asymmetry going on purpose, and that is okay. So as long as it looks good on the form, you're good to go. And there is our back, and there is our front. Now if you can imagine this in a heavier silk rather than a acetate lining, there's going to be less of this. It's really going to conform to the body. Yeah? Alright, so I am putting ease across in this bust area. So it needed a little bit of fullness here. If this was a drapier fabric, I might not have had to do that. It could have even been eased in and not like gathered in. And then I have a sway back, so I have taken a tuck in here. So it would actually be a seam across here. And then you can see the back. It would kind of end up fishtailing. I hope that was helpful. Please join me tomorrow for our full dress draping. I picked a dress out of a 1930s book, and I have fabric. Let me show you that. So it's gonna be like teased. I have this vintage silk. It's terribly wrinkled, so excuse me. It appears to be like hand painted, but it's not. It's definitely printed. Gorgeous. It has a nicer drape than the acetate, but it's not as slinky as, say, like a 4-ply crepe. So I'm going to be doing a 1938 dress where we're starting to go into the 1940s, and it's less like slinky clingy, and there's a little bit more structure to the fabrics that they're picking because of this fabric. So I'm going to drape that dress, take it to flat pattern, and then cut it out of that. Hopefully, if everything goes well, you'll see that entire dress done. Thanks for sewing with me. I hope you learned a lot, and if you did, please click all the links, and I will see you next time. Be sure to collect your badge. Bye.